Water is the first rule of civilization, or so we are taught. Our history books are filled with stories of great societies rising along the banks of mighty rivers. But what if that rule was meant to be broken? Some of humanity's most astonishing and enduring civilizations did not simply find water, they invented it. They built glittering cities and vast empires in the heart of deserts, in landscapes where rivers do not flow. This is not a minor historical footnote. It is a profound puzzle of human ingenuity. How did desert civilizations capture water without rivers? By the end of this exploration, you will understand the brilliant and varied methods that turned sand into soil and drought into plenty. We will uncover how society from thin air, tamed violent flash floods, and built subterranean rivers. What does it truly mean to master an environment that seems designed to repel you? The desert presents a paradox of profound emptiness and hidden potential. At its core, a desert is defined by a brutal arithmetic of water, where what little arrives is quickly stolen away. Rainfall is not just scarce, it is wildly unpredictable, arriving in brief, violent bursts that the hard-baked earth cannot absorb. The sun, relentless and fierce, acts as a constant thief, with evaporation rates so high that any exposed water vanishes into the dry air almost as soon as it appears. There are no gentle, perennial rivers here to provide a stable, beating heart for a society. This is the environment that seems to actively forbid the gathering of people in large numbers, let alone the flourishing of a complex civilization. Our traditional historical narrative is built on the opposite setting. Think of ancient Egypt cradled by the predictable, life-giving floods of the Nile. Or Mesopotamia, the land between the Tigris and Euphrates. The Indus Valley and the Yellow River Basin all follow this same, seemingly essential blueprint, where a great river does the work of delivering and distributing water. A desert civilization has no such partner. It cannot rely on a consistent, generous source flowing past its doorstep. Therefore, the very act of surviving at scale in such a place required more than adaptation. It demanded a complete reinvention of the relationship between people and water. These societies had to become architects of their own hydrological cycles, building systems that captured, preserved, and meticulously allocated every single drop. Their first challenge was to solve the desert's fundamental equation, to balance its harsh inputs against human need. This distinction is crucial because it separates a simple settlement from a true civilization. An oasis is a gift of geography, a rare place where water naturally breaches the surface, creating a haven of palms and life in the desert. Communities that cluster around such a spot are living with the desert, not mastering it. They are bound to that one precious source, their size and ambition limited by its flow. The societies we are exploring did something radically different. They refused to be prisoners of geography. Their goal was not to find water, but to command it, to create a reliable, distributable supply across hundreds of miles of arid land. This is the leap from passive reliance to active engineering. It meant looking at the entire desert landscape not as a barren wasteland, but as a complex machine for catching and storing water. Every slope, every wadi, every patch of soil became a component in a vast, life-sustaining system. They built networks so extensive and so intelligent that they could support populations of tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands, turning regions devoid of rivers into agricultural heartlands and centers of trade and power. This was not gardening, it was geoengineering on a grand scale, a silent testament to human foresight that reshaped the very earth beneath their feet. The genius of these desert engineers began with a fundamental reimagining of what water even is. They abandoned the idea of a permanent, visible source. Instead, they learned to see water as a fleeting event, a temporary guest in a landscape that wanted to evict it immediately. Their entire strategy was built on capturing water at the precise moment and location it arrived, whether from the sky, the air, or deep within the earth, and then building a system to protect it from the desert's relentless demand to take it back. This is the principle of harvesting invisible water. It is not about finding a lake, but about intercepting a raindrop before it can vanish into the sand, coaxing moisture from the morning air, or tapping into hidden reservoirs that never see the sun. Every method they developed was a direct answer to a simple, brutal question. How do you catch what the desert is designed to lose? The most immediate and dramatic source was the sporadic, violent rainstorm. While a temperate climate might receive gentle, soaking showers, a desert often gets its entire annual rainfall in a few terrifying downpours. To a society waiting for this water, that storm is not a nuisance, it is a bounty on the move, and it must be captured at all costs before it runs off, evaporates, or sinks beyond reach. This urgent need gave rise to the first and perhaps most widespread category of desert water technology, a method so elegant it transformed entire watersheds into tools. The answer to that question lies not on the surface but far beneath it. While some cultures mastered the art of catching rushing floodwaters, others performed an even more remarkable feat. They learned to build their own rivers underground. This technology is known as the qanat, a word of Persian origin, though you might hear it called a karez in Central Asia or a fagara in North Africa. At its heart, the qanat is a deceptively simple concept, yet its execution represents a monumental investment of communal effort and precise geographical understanding. The process began in the foothills of mountains, where seasonal rains and snowmelt would seep deep into the ground, collecting in hidden layers of water-saturated rock known as aquifers. The builders of a qanat would first locate this precious underground reservoir. Then, they would begin the arduous work of digging a vertical shaft straight down to reach the water table. But this was just the starting point. From the bottom of that first shaft, teams of diggers would begin carving a gently sloping tunnel, moving horizontally back toward the distant plains where their settlement or farmland lay. This tunnel, just large enough for a person to crawl through, had to maintain a perfect, minuscule gradient, a slope so slight that water would flow by gravity alone, but not so steep that it would erode the tunnel walls with its own force. As the tunnel extended for miles, more vertical shafts were dug at regular intervals, both to remove excavated material and to provide crucial air and access for maintenance. The result was nothing short of an artificial, subterranean river. It emerged at the surface in the arid lowlands as a steady, reliable spring, a permanent oasis engineered by human hands. The brilliance of the qanat system is in its elegant solutions to the desert's core problems. By keeping the water enclosed in a dark, cool tunnel, it was completely protected from the devastating evaporation that would claim any open canal in hours. The slow, steady seepage from the aquifer into the tunnel meant the flow was consistent, not subject to the violent whims of seasonal storms, and as the water traveled through layers of sand and gravel, it was naturally filtered, emerging clean and cool. This was not just a water source, it was a civilizational foundation. From its origins in ancient Persia, the technology spread across trade routes and empires, from the deserts of Arabia to the oases of the Sahara, and as far east as the arid reaches of western China. Wherever it was built, it enabled communities to bloom in the most improbable places, creating ribbons of green fertility in landscapes of brown and gold, all fed by a river that flowed silently in the darkness below. While the qanat builders worked in silent darkness, another desert civilization mastered the art of taming water at its most visible and violent moment. In the red sandstone canyons of what is now southern Jordan, the Nabatean people faced a hydrological reality defined by terrifying, beautiful chaos. Their legendary capital, Petra, sits in a landscape of dramatic wadis, deep, dry riverbounds that sit silent and empty for most of the year. But when the rare desert storm finally breaks over the highlands, these channels transform in an instant. What was a dusty path becomes a roaring, churning torrent of water, mud, and rock, a flash flood with the power to obliterate anything in its path. For a lesser people, these unpredictable deluges were a destructive force to be feared and avoided. The Nabateans saw them differently. They looked at that rampaging wall of water and saw the entire lifeblood of their civilization arriving all at once. Their genius was not in avoiding the flood, but in becoming its architect. They built a system to meet that chaos with perfect, calculated control, transforming a destructive event into their sole, sustainable water source. Their strategy was a masterclass in hydrological engineering. It began high in the hills surrounding Petra, where they constructed a network of small but strategically placed dams and diversion walls. The purpose of these structures was not necessarily to hold the water back permanently, but to manage its furious energy. As the flood surged down the main wadi toward the city center, these features would slow the flow, break its force, and most importantly, divert a portion of that precious water out of the main channel. They carved intricate systems of channels and pipelines directly into the rose-colored cliff faces, guiding the captured water away from the destructive path of the main flood. The final destination for this hijacked bounty was a city-wide network of monumental cisterns. These were not simple holes in the ground. They were vast, plaster-lined reservoirs, some carved deep into the bedrock itself, others built as massive, enclosed pools. The entire city, from the royal tombs to the humblest dwelling, was plumbed into this grid. Every drop that could be seized from the short-lived fury of a storm was channeled, filtered, and locked away in these subterranean vaults, safe from the evaporative sun. This command of flash floods did more than just quench thirst. It built an empire. Petra sits at a critical crossroads of ancient trade routes, linking the incense trails of Arabia with the markets of the Mediterranean. Caravans of thousands of camels carrying spices, silks, and frankincense would arrive at the city gates after weeks in the brutal desert. What the Nabateans offered was not just shelter, but guaranteed survival. They could provide water for every person and animal in a massive caravan, a service no other city in that hyper-arid region could reliably match. Their wealth, literally carved into the magnificent facades of their tombs and temples, was funded by this control over the desert's most fleeting resource. They did not just endure their environment, they weaponized its greatest challenge into their most powerful economic and political tool. The silent, empty wadis that surrounded Petra were not a sign of absence but a promise. They were the dry veins of a landscape waiting for its brief, wild pulse, a pulse the Nabateans had learned to catch calm and convert into enduring power. The Nabatean mastery of flash floods was a spectacular feat of redirecting nature's fury. Yet for many desert cultures, the challenge was not managing a sudden, overwhelming torrent, but capturing the far more modest and scattered gift of direct rainfall. Their philosophy was one of meticulous collection, of leaving no drop behind. This approach treated every surface, from a grand mountaintop to a simple courtyard, as a potential catchment area, a tool for harvesting the sky. The most enduring symbol of this philosophy is the hillside terrace. In places like the Negev desert, ancient farmers looked at steep, rocky slopes that shed water as quickly as it fell and saw untapped potential. Their solution was to reshape the very contour of the land. They built long, low walls of stone, one after another, following the natural curve of the hillside. Each wall acted as a tiny dam, catching soil and organic matter that would otherwise wash away. Over time, these terraces transformed a barren incline into a series of level, fertile steps. But their function was hydrological genius. When rain did fall, the terraces broke its momentum. Instead of water racing down the slope in a destructive sheet, It was slowed, pooled briefly behind each wall, and given precious time to seep deep into the soil. This process recharged the ground moisture directly around the roots of crops, creating a self-watering garden built into the mountainside. It was agriculture by patience and geometry, turning a hillside into a sponge. The principle of catchment extended far beyond farmland. In settlements, every hard surface became part of the water grid. In the highlands of ancient Yemen, for instance, builders engineered entire landscapes to capture rain. They paved vast areas of natural bedrock or constructed specially sloped courtyards with impermeable plaster. These were not living spaces, they were dedicated water farms. Intricate networks of small channels, often carved directly into the stone, would then funnel every drop that fell on these surfaces into a central cistern. Rooftops, too, were designed for this single purpose. The rainfall that landed on a home did not simply spill onto the ground and vanish. It was guided by gutters and pipes into a private or communal reservoir. This was a civilization that understood its economy in terms of liquid volume. The size of your cistern often reflected your wealth and status, for it held the key to survival through the long, dry months. It was a quiet, daily kind of ingenuity, less dramatic than confronting a flash flood but no less vital. It represented a profound shift in perspective, where people stopped seeing rain as something that merely happened to them, and began to see every surface under the open sky as an active participant in their survival, a collaborator in the delicate art of coaxing life from a reluctant land. But what happens when even the rain refuses to come? In the coastal reaches of the Atacama Desert, stretching along the Pacific coast of Chile, that is not a hypothetical question, it is the defining reality. This is one of the driest places on the planet, a stark landscape where decades can pass without a single drop of measurable rainfall. The sun beats down on a land so parched that scientists use it to simulate the surface of Mars. Yet life has not only persisted here, it has found a way to drink from the sky itself by redefining what the sky offers. The key is not rain but fog. Here, a thick, persistent blanket of mist known as the Camanchaca rolls inland from the cold Humboldt Current of the Pacific Ocean. It is a ghostly river of moisture, flowing silently over the bone-dry hills. For the ancient peoples of this coast and for the communities that live there today, this fog was not an atmospheric curiosity. It was the only well they had. Their innovation was to build a spiderweb to catch it. The principle is beautifully simple, yet it requires a deep understanding of the environment. They observed how droplets from the fog would collect on the leaves and spines of certain hardy plants, eventually dripping to the ground. They mimicked and amplified this natural process. Long ago, they might have used carefully arranged walls of piled stones or dense, living hedges of vegetation placed perpendicular to the wind. Today, the technology is often seen in the form of large, vertical mesh nets, strung between poles on the ridges that first intercept the incoming fog. As the damp wind pushes through the fine mesh, countless tiny water droplets collide and stick to the fibers. They coalesce, grow heavier, and finally begin to drip, much like condensation on a cold glass. Below each net, a simple gutter or trough catches this steady trickle, channeling the harvested water into storage tanks. A single panel in the right location can collect dozens of gallons of clean, fresh water every day, drawn literally from the air. This method represents perhaps the most delicate and specialized form of water capture we have seen. It requires no underground aquifer, no violent flood, not even a passing cloud. It is a testament to human observation and adaptation at its most precise, a quiet, persistent siphon pulling life from a seemingly lifeless haze. Where others saw only a barren hillside shrouded in mist, these communities saw a harvest waiting to be gathered, proving that in the desert, ingenuity is the only permanent spring. While fog nets capture a drifting river of mist, other desert innovators turned their attention to a far more subtle and intimate source of water. They learned to harvest the night itself. In the stillness that follows a scorching day, the desert air often holds a hidden treasure, a faint, diffuse moisture that is completely invisible until the right conditions coax it into liquid form. This is the principle of condensation, and ancient herders and farmers mastered it with elegantly simple technology. Their tools were not nets or tunnels, but the very temperature of the earth and stone. They created what are known as dew ponds or condensation traps, passive collectors that work like a sponge for the atmosphere. The design is a lesson in thermodynamics made practical. The most common form was a shallow, bowl-shaped depression carefully excavated in the ground. But this was no ordinary hole. Its builders would line it with a special, insulating layer, often of straw or clay, and then cap that with an impermeable seal of puddled chalk or clay. This lining was the key. Its purpose was to thermally isolate the pond from the warm ground below. When the sun set and the desert air temperature plummeted, this insulated basin would cool down much faster than the surrounding earth. The moist night air passing over this suddenly cold surface would be chilled past its dew point. Just like moisture forming on the outside of a cold drink, countless tiny droplets would condense on the lined walls and bottom of the depression. Over the course of the night, these droplets would coalesce and trickle downward, slowly but steadily filling the pond from what seemed like nothing but empty air. By dawn, a shallow pool of fresh water would glisten where hours before there had been only dry earth. Another variation used piles of stones instead of a dug pit. A mound of clean, rounded rocks, chosen for their ability to radiate heat quickly, would be assembled. As the stones cooled rapidly after sunset, condensation would form on their surfaces and drip down into a central collection jar or a lined pit beneath the pile. The scale of these systems was often modest, rarely supporting large human populations. Their true value was in their autonomy and reliability in marginal zones. For nomadic herders guiding sheep or goats across sparse grasslands, a well-placed dew pond could mean the difference between life and loss for their animals during a dry season. For a remote homestead or a small monastic community, such a trap could provide just enough water for a kitchen garden of hardy vegetables, a vital supplement to a precarious existence. These were not the grand, civilization-sustaining works of Petra or the qanat builders. Instead, they represent a deeply localized, almost personal form of hydrological wisdom. They required no moving parts, no maintenance beyond occasional clearing, and no energy input other than the daily cycle of the sun and the night sky. In their quiet way, dew ponds embody a profound philosophical approach to survival in arid lands, one of patient observation and harmonious alignment with natural rhythms. They remind us that sometimes the most sophisticated solution is not to conquer a force of nature, but to listen closely to its whispers and prepare a place for its gifts. Capturing water was only half the battle. The desert sun, that relentless and efficient thief, was always waiting to steal it back. This meant the true measure of a desert civilization's genius was not just in how it gathered water, but in how it defended it. The science of storage was a silent, ongoing war against evaporation, a conflict fought with plaster, shadow, and clay. Imagine the immense effort of diverting a flash flood or digging a miles-long qanat, only to let that hard-won water sit in an open basin under the blazing sky. Within hours, it could vanish into the dry air, rendering all that work meaningless. So, these engineers became masters of preservation. Their first line of defense was creating a perfect seal. For large communal cisterns, like those carved into the bedrock of Petra or built in the courtyards of Yemeni towns, they developed sophisticated impermeable linings. A common mixture was a type of waterproof plaster, often made from burned limestone, sand, and ash. This was meticulously applied to the walls and floor of a reservoir, creating a seamless, non-porous barrier that prevented precious droplets from seeping away into the thirsty earth. It was a simple concept with monumental consequences, turning a hole in the ground into a permanent vault for liquid life. The second strategy was all about location, location, location. They understood that temperature and exposure were the enemy, so they built their storage in the coolest places possible. Vast cisterns were excavated deep underground, where the Earth's mass provided natural insulation and constant cool temperatures. Others were constructed in the perpetual shade of north-facing cliffs or within the thick walls of buildings. Even the shape of a storage pool was strategic. Many were designed to be deep rather than wide, minimizing the surface area exposed to the air. This careful placement wasn't an afterthought. It was a core principle of hydrological design. By thinking in 3 dimensions and using the landscape itself as a thermal shield, they could drastically slow the rate of evaporation, sometimes preserving water for an entire dry season or longer. This allowed a society to smooth out the wild irregularity of desert weather, creating a buffer of security against unpredictable droughts. But water security also had to reach the most intimate level, the individual household. This is where another transformative invention came into play, the humble ceramic jar. While grand cisterns served the community, families needed their own daily supply. The widespread production of sturdy, glazed pottery revolutionized personal water management. A well-made jar with its narrow opening and sealed interior was a miniature fortress against loss. It could be kept in the coolest corner of a home, covered with a cloth or a lid to keep out dust and insects, and its contents would stay fresh for days. This technology empowered every household to manage its own ration, to have a measure of independence from the communal source. It turned water from a public commodity that required constant fetching into a private asset that could be carefully stewarded. The collective genius is clear. A civilization might harvest water with grand, landscape-altering projects, but that water only became true wealth when it was locked securely away, saved for the future in containers ranging from the monumental to the personal. The seamless link between capture and conservation is what turned a moment of hydrological luck into the enduring foundation of a city, proving that in the desert, the art of keeping is just as vital as the art of taking. The principles of desert water mastery found perhaps their most ambitious expression far from the Old World, in the blistering heart of North America's Sonoran Desert. Here, a people known today as the Hohokam, a name meaning those who have gone in the language of their descendants, performed an engineering feat that rivals any ancient wonder. For over 1,000 years, they built a hydraulic empire not along a generous, stable river, but by wresting control from the most unpredictable desert waterways imaginable. Their homeland, in what is now central Arizona, was defined by the Salt and Gila rivers. To call these desert rivers is to understand a specific, challenging rhythm. For much of the year, their beds were broad, sandy washes, silent and dry under the sun. But with the arrival of seasonal monsoon rains or distant mountain snowmelt, they could transform in a flash into raging, silt-laden torrents. This was not the gentle, predictable Nile. This was water as a brief, violent event. The Hohokam response was one of breathtaking scale and precision. They did not simply dig a few ditches from the riverbank. They constructed the most extensive and sophisticated irrigation system in the prehistoric New World, a network of canals that eventually stretched for hundreds of miles across the arid plain. Using stone tools and baskets to move earth, they excavated primary channels that were monumental in themselves, some measuring 30 feet wide and 10 feet deep. From these main arteries, they branched out a delicate fractal web of smaller ditches and laterals, a vascular system designed to deliver life to every field. The engineering challenges were immense. They had to calculate precise gradients so water would flow by gravity across vast distances, yet not so fast that it would erode the canals. They built diversion dams and headgates from rock and woven brush to control the intake from the tumultuous rivers during floods, and they constantly fought the desert's desire to reclaim their work, battling silt accumulation and performing endless maintenance. This was not a society living with a river. It was a society that had built a new, artificial river of its own making, one that flowed on a human schedule. The result was a transformation of the landscape, where there had been creosote and cactus, vast fields of corn, beans, squash, and cotton flourished. This agricultural surplus supported large, permanent villages with platform mounds and ball courts, centers of trade and ceremony that connected a wide region. The Hohokam created a verdant, engineered oasis in the desert, a testament to the power of collective will and hydrological insight, proving that even the most fleeting desert river could be persuaded to sustain a civilization for centuries. Yet even the Hohokam's monumental canals were not the final word in desert water mastery. To find perhaps the most legendary system of all, we must travel to a land of frankincense and fable, where the achievements of engineers became woven into myth itself. The southern edge of the Arabian Peninsula is a landscape of profound aridity, a place where the very idea of a great city seems like a mirage. And yet, for over 1,000 years, this was the home of fabulously wealthy kingdoms, the Sabaeans and later the Himyarites, whose names were synonymous with spice, gold, and power. Their capital, Marib, was not just a city. It was an astonishment, a glittering metropolis supporting tens of thousands of people in the heart of a desert. Ancient travelers and writers spoke of it with awe, its prosperity so immense it seemed magical. The source of that magic was not a river but a wall. The Great Dam of Marib stands as one of the ancient world's most ambitious hydrological projects, a structure so central to civilization that its final failure is remembered as a cataclysmic event, even mentioned in the Quran as a divine punishment for ingratitude. But what was this dam really, and how did it work? The common image is of a single, towering barrier holding back a vast, permanent lake, but the reality was far more clever and complex. The Marib Dam was a masterpiece of floodwater harvesting on a staggering scale. It was a massive, earth-filled structure faced with stone built across the broad Wadi Dana. Its primary purpose was not to create a reservoir for year-round storage, though it did hold some water. Its genius was in taming the violent, seasonal floods that surged down from the distant mountains. The dam would slow this torrent, capturing a portion of its water and silt, and then a network of sluice gates and secondary dams would meticulously distribute the bounty through two main canal systems. These canals, one north and one south of the Wadi, fed an irrigated oasis that stretched for thousands of acres, a green paradise of date palms, grains, and orchards in the desert. This was the engine of Sabaean wealth, allowing them to control the trade in frankincense and myrrh. The system required constant, sophisticated maintenance. Communities of engineers and laborers were dedicated to dredging silt from the canals and repairing the dam stone facing after each flood season. For centuries, this delicate balance held. But the very nature of the system contained the seeds of its vulnerability. Siltation was a relentless enemy. Each flood deposited fertile soil on the fields, which was essential, but it also filled the canal beds and the reservoir behind the dam, requiring ever more labor to clear. Political stability was just as crucial as maintaining the vast, shared infrastructure required a strong, centralized authority and social cooperation. Historical records and archaeological evidence suggest that as internal conflicts weakened the Himyarite kingdom in the 6th century, the meticulous maintenance of the dam and its canals began to falter. Then, according to tradition, came a final, catastrophic flood, one too great for the neglected structure to bear. the breach of the Great Dam of Marib was not just an engineering failure, it was the collapse of an entire way of life. The lifeline of the city was severed, the agricultural base that supported its population vanished, and the great urban center was gradually abandoned to the sands. The story of Marib is a powerful reminder that in the desert, water systems are not just technical achievements, they are profound social contracts. They represent a covenant between people, their leaders, and the landscape, a covenant that requires not only brilliance to create, but unwavering vigilance to sustain. The legend of Marib's dam grew so powerful it nearly eclipsed the physical reality. Ancient texts spoke of a miraculous wall holding back a sea in the desert, a symbol of divine favor for a righteous people. The archaeological truth, uncovered by decades of study, is in many ways more impressive than the myth, for it reveals not a supernatural feat, but a towering human one. The Great Dam of Marib was not a single, solid wall of stone. It was a sophisticated hybrid structure, an earth-filled dam reinforced with stone. Builders piled compacted earth and rubble to form a massive core, then faced its critical points with precisely cut stone blocks, particularly around the sluice gates. It spanned the Wadi Donna, a wide, dry riverbed that could transform into a roaring channel during the biannual monsoon rains. Its primary purpose was hydrological orchestration, not simple containment. The dam was not designed to create a deep, permanent lake that would evaporate under the fierce Arabian sun. Instead, it acted as a giant speed bump and a diversion point for the precious, silt-rich floodwaters. As the seasonal torrent surged down the wadi, the dam's bulk would slow its destructive momentum. A series of meticulously engineered stone sluice gates, controlled by a dedicated class of water managers, could then be opened to release measured flows into two primary canal systems. These canals, north and south, were the true marvels. They were monumental gravity-fed channels, carved and maintained across the landscape, that carried the captured floodwaters far out into the surrounding plains. This was the genius of the system. It transformed a brief, violent hydrological event into a widespread, life-giving resource. The water, laden with fertile silt from the highlands, would spread across carefully prepared fields through a network of smaller ditches, essentially fertilizing and irrigating the land in one annual act. Through this managed deluge, the Sabaeans and their successors turned thousands of acres of barren desert into a vast, green agricultural plain, a man-made oasis that could feed a metropolis and fund an empire of trade. The dam was the heart, but this vast, engineered watershed was the thriving body it sustained. The monumental dam at Marib was more than a wall of earth and stone. It was a mirror of the society that built it. This reveals a deeper truth about every desert civilization we have explored. The technology itself, from the qanat to the terrace, was astonishing, but it was only the visible expression of something far more profound, a revolution in social organization. Digging a miles-long underground tunnel, maintaining hundreds of miles of canals, or coordinating the capture of a flash flood, these were not tasks for a lone family or a scattered village. They demanded a level of cooperation, planning, and sustained effort that reshaped human communities from the ground up. The true foundation of these desert empires was not the water they captured, but the people who agreed to capture it together. This required a radical social innovation, the move from simple kinship groups to complex, purpose-built societies organized around a single, vital resource. At the heart of this was the need for centralized authority. Someone had to survey the landscape and decide where to dig the first qanat shaft. A governing body had to mobilize hundreds, sometimes thousands, of laborers for years of back-breaking construction. Skilled engineers, the ancient equivalent of hydrological experts, had to calculate gradients, design sluice gates, and plan distribution networks with a precision that meant the difference between bounty and drought. This was not casual work, it was a grand communal project that defined the rhythm of life for generations. But building the system was only the beginning. The harder task was maintaining it. Canals silted up, tunnel walls collapsed, and diversion dams needed repair after every storm. This required not just a one-time effort, but a permanent institution dedicated to upkeep. Societies developed formal roles for canal cleaners, qanat inspectors, and dam wardens. Their work was often supported by taxes or communal labor obligations, a direct investment by every member of the community in the infrastructure that kept them all alive. This created a powerful social bond, a shared destiny literally carved into the landscape. Perhaps the most delicate innovation of all was the development of water law. When every drop is counted, who gets how much and when, the answer was never left to chance or force. These civilizations crafted intricate legal codes to govern water rights, distribution schedules, and dispute resolution. In ancient Petra, clay tablets detail precise allocations to different city districts. Along the qanats of Persia, water shares were often measured by time, with a farmer's turn to access the flow dictated by the shadow of a sundial or the burning of a specific candle. These rules were sacred because violating them threatened not just a neighbor's harvest, but the stability of the entire community. Historians sometimes describe such cultures as hydraulic societies, where control of water is inseparable from control of power. The king or council that managed the distribution of water held the ultimate authority, the power to grant life or condemn to scarcity. This could certainly lead to rigid hierarchies and immense centralized control. Yet it also forged a powerful social contract. The collective management of water was not merely an economic arrangement. It was a matter of survival that demanded trust, fairness, and a long-term perspective. The glittering city in the desert, then, was the product of a pact, an agreement among thousands to subordinate individual desire to a common plan, to labor today for a drink tomorrow, and to govern a resource so precious that its fair sharing became the bedrock of their civilization. The stone channels and underground tunnels were merely the tools. The real engineering marvel was the society itself. Yet the story of desert water does not belong only to kings and empires. Far to the north, on the high, arid mesas of the Colorado Plateau, another people crafted a solution of elegant, communal simplicity. The ancestral Pueblones, sometimes called the Anasazi, faced a water reality defined not by great rivers or predictable monsoons, but by a delicate, scattered gift. Their homeland was a landscape of sandstone cliffs, deep canyons, and flat-topped mesas. Rain, when it came, fell lightly and unevenly, often running quickly off the bare rock surfaces before it could soak into the thin soil. Their response was not to command a landscape, but to collaborate intimately with its every contour. They became masters of the small-scale capture, building a hydrological system that mirrored their social structure, one of cooperative villages rather than a centralized state. Their tools were humble but brilliantly effective. On the sloping sides of mesas and in the mouths of small washes, they built low walls of stacked stone, check dams designed not to stop water but to slow it. As sporadic runoff trickled down a slope, these small barriers would pool the water briefly, allowing silt to settle and moisture to penetrate the ground right where it was needed. They created grid gardens, laying out patterns of stones on flat ground to reduce erosion, trap moisture, and even create slightly warmer microclimates for their crops of corn, beans, and squash. Most ingenious were their diversion channels. They would carefully carve shallow troughs into the bedrock of a mesa top, designed to intercept rainwater and sheet flow, funneling it away from the cliff edge and toward collection basins or directly onto terraced fields built on the slopes below. This was water harvesting at its most localized and immediate. Every household, every clan likely participated in building and maintaining these features, a shared labor that directly fed their families. The contrast with the vast Hohokam Canal network is profound. Where the Hohokam moved mountains of earth to reshape a river, the ancestral pueblones worked with the existing rock, moving only stones. Where the Hohokam system required a centralized authority to manage labor and distribution across a wide region, the puebloan approach could be managed by a single village or even a family group. This reveals a crucial spectrum of social organization. Both civilizations solved the same existential problem of capturing desert water, but one did so through monumental, state-level engineering, while the other thrived through adaptable, community-level ingenuity. The cliff dwellings at places like Mesa Verde are not just architectural wonders, they are the endpoints of a water system, situated where seepage from the mesa tops provided vital moisture. Their story reminds us that mastery of a harsh environment can take many forms, from the grand imperial scheme to the quiet, persistent work of a village tending its check dams, each method perfectly tuned to the scale of its society and the specific whisper of water in its land. But the qanat was never just a tool for survival. Its true purpose, its highest cultural calling, was to create something far more profound, an oasis of the mind. The Persians gave this vision a beautiful name, paradisa, which means a walled enclosure. From this term we get our word paradise. This was not a vague spiritual concept, but a tangible, earthly reality made possible by the steady, hidden flow of the qanat. The Paradise Garden was the ultimate expression of hydrological mastery, where captured water was translated into beauty, order, and symbolic power. Imagine a high wall of sun-baked brick, shielding an interior world from the harsh desert winds and the relentless sun. Inside, the qanat's water is channeled into a central, geometric system. A straight, stone-lined watercourse becomes the garden's spine, often dividing the space into 4 symmetrical quadrants, a representation of the world. From this main channel, smaller runnels feed every corner of the enclosure. Here, the water performs its magic. It nourishes rows of shady fruit trees, peach, apricot, pomegranate, and citrus. It feeds beds of fragrant flowers like roses and lilies, and supports vines heavy with grapes. The very act of cultivation in such a place was a statement of absolute control. This was not subsistence farming, it was horticulture as high art. The garden was a manufactured microclimate. The evaporation from the water channels and the transpiration from the dense plant life actually cooled the air, creating a refuge of palpable freshness. The sound of trickling water provided a constant, soothing soundtrack, a stark contrast to the silent dryness outside the walls. These gardens were not merely beautiful, they were multi-sensory sanctuaries of abundance in a land of scarcity. They became the prized possessions of royalty and nobility, the perfect setting for poetry, music, and philosophical discussion. To sit in a paradise garden was to experience the triumph of human ingenuity over nature's austerity. It was proof that through knowledge and collective effort, one could not only survive in the desert, but could craft within it a space of exquisite, ordered plenty. The qanat, therefore, did more than irrigate crops, it irrigated culture itself. It lifted the practical science of water capture into the realm of aesthetics and meaning, transforming a technical solution into a living symbol of harmony and eternal refreshment. The Oasis Garden represents a cultural zenith, a place where water became artistry, but this hard-won knowledge was never destined to remain a local secret. When a vast empire encountered these desert innovations, it did not dismiss them as primitive tricks, it recognized them as instruments of power. The Romans, masters of assimilation, arrived in North Africa and saw a landscape that defied their familiar models of rivers and aqueducts. To secure their frontier and feed their legions, they did not impose a purely Roman solution. Instead, they observed, learned, and then executed a breathtaking campaign of hydrological engineering, systematizing local genius on an imperial scale. In provinces like Libya and Tunisia, far from the Tiber's flow, the Roman military machine turned its formidable organizational skills to a new objective, capturing the desert itself. They constructed not isolated structures but integrated landscape-wide systems. At ancient cities like Leptis Magna and Sabratha, they built vast, interconnected networks of cisterns, some large enough to be mistaken for underground temples. These were not simple holes but meticulously plastered reservoirs, often built in series so they could be cleaned and maintained without disrupting the entire supply. They complemented these with robust dams in strategic wadis, designed to trap the violent seasonal floods that rushed from the highlands. But their most impressive feat was the comprehensive management of catchment. They mapped entire watersheds, paving natural depressions and constructing miles of low, sloping walls to channel every possible drop of rainfall toward their storage complexes. This was desert hydrology industrialized, a single Roman frontier fort, like those along the Limes Tripolitanus, might be supported by a dozen such cisterns, ensuring a garrison could withstand a years-long siege not by enemy forces but by drought. The purpose was dual: to sustain the military presence that projected Roman authority, and to enable the growth of new, prosperous cities that would anchor that authority permanently. The local populations had long understood the principles of catching sporadic water. The Roman contribution was one of scale, coordination, and relentless standardization. They brought the bureaucratic mind to the desert's chaos, surveying, recording, and maintaining these systems with the same efficiency they applied to their road networks. This was the transfer of knowledge across an imperial boundary, not as a cultural curiosity, but as a strategic imperative. It demonstrates that the true power of an empire often lay not in inventing new technologies, but in recognizing brilliant solutions wherever they were found, and then deploying the full weight of the state to replicate them across a continent. The desert, once a barrier, became a defended asset, its hidden water harnessed to fuel the expansion and endurance of one of history's greatest empires. Yet even the most ingenious systems existed within a delicate and unforgiving balance. For all their brilliance, these desert civilizations were engaged in a constant negotiation with nature, and sometimes the terms of that agreement changed. The very climate they had learned to master could shift in ways that pushed their engineered solutions beyond a breaking point. A prolonged drought, lasting not for years but for decades, could slowly drain the aquifers that fed the qanats, turning subterranean rivers into dusty tunnels. A major seismic event, common in many arid regions, could fracture the carefully laid stone linings of a cistern or collapse a critical section of a canal network in an instant. These were not failures of imagination or effort, but stark reminders that human ingenuity, however vast, operates within the boundaries of a dynamic and often unpredictable planet. The story of the Great Dam of Marib serves as perhaps the most poignant case study in this fragile relationship. For centuries, it was the heart of a thriving civilization, a testament to human control over a hostile landscape. But its design contained an inherent vulnerability, one tied directly to its success. Each seasonal flood the dam captured carried not only life-giving water, but also a burden of fine silt from the distant mountains. This silt was a double-edged sword. When spread across the fields by the irrigation canals, it was a natural fertilizer, renewing the soil's vitality. Yet it also steadily accumulated in the canal beds themselves and in the reservoir behind the dam wall. This meant the system required relentless, organized maintenance. Teams of laborers, likely organized by the state, had to constantly dredge the channels and clear the silt to keep the water flowing. For generations, this was a manageable cost of doing business in the desert. But what happens when the social or political will to maintain that effort begins to fade? Historical evidence and local tradition suggest that in the centuries leading to the dam's legendary failure, the Himyarite kingdom faced internal conflicts and perhaps a weakening of the centralized authority that had overseen the hydrological system for so long. Maintenance may have become sporadic and the silt continued to build. Then, according to accounts, a final catastrophic flood surge, possibly stronger than any in living memory, struck a structure already compromised by neglect. The dam, which had stood as a symbol of absolute control, was overwhelmed. The breach was not merely an engineering disaster, it was a hydrological collapse that severed the civilization's lifeline. The carefully managed oasis that fed a metropolis began to wither, and the great city of Marib, its reason for being suddenly gone, was gradually abandoned. This story moves beyond myth to teach a sobering lesson about environmental thresholds. The dam was a brilliant solution to a specific set of climatic and hydrological conditions. But when those conditions were compounded by a social system unable to sustain its own creation, the entire equilibrium shattered. It reveals that the ultimate test of a desert civilization's water system was not just its initial design, but its resilience over generations, its ability to adapt to slow-changing climates, and the enduring strength of the social contract required to maintain it. The silence that eventually fell over places like Marib is a powerful part of their legacy, a whisper reminding us that our greatest creations are always in dialogue with the world they are built upon. The silent flow of a qanat or the sudden bounty of a captured flood presented an illusion of permanence. In truth, these were not monuments set in stone, but living, breathing systems locked in an eternal battle against the desert's constant reclamation. The initial construction was a feat of heroic effort, but the true test of a civilization was the unglamorous, perpetual work that came after. The sustainability of every channel, every tunnel, and every cistern depended entirely on a society's unwavering commitment to maintenance. This was the hidden, endless labor that turned engineering marvels into enduring legacies. Consider the qanat, that miraculous underground river. Its dark, cool tunnel was not a static pipe. Over time, mineral deposits could build up on its walls, slowly narrowing the passageway like hardening arteries. Silt and loose debris would wash in, threatening to clog the gentle flow. This required a specialized class of workers, skilled and courageous, who would descend the vertical access shafts with lamps and tools. They would crawl for miles through the cramped, pitch-black tunnels, scraping walls clear and hauling out sediment basket by basket. This was dangerous, claustrophobic work, a ritual of preservation performed generation after generation. Above ground, the story was the same but under a blistering sun. The vast canal networks of the Hohokam or the Sabaeans faced a relentless enemy, silt. Each flood brought life-giving water, but also a fine, choking sediment that settled in the canal beds. If left unchecked, the channels would slowly fill, raising the water level until it could no longer reach the fields. So, communities organized regular dredging campaigns. Using simple tools, people would gather to scoop out the soft mud, pile it on the banks, and restore the precise gradient that made the whole system function. This was backbreaking communal labor, a tax paid not in coin but in sweat directly to the earth. Even the grand cisterns of Petra or the Roman outposts were not immune. Their waterproof plaster linings could crack under seismic shifts or the pressure of water. A single breach could mean the loss of an entire season's reserve. Maintaining these vast tanks required constant inspection and repair, a quiet vigilance against slow decay. This perpetual cycle of care reveals a profound truth. The brilliance of a desert water system was not just in its design, but in the social order it demanded. A stable, cooperative society was not merely a beneficiary of this technology, it was its essential operating system. There needed to be clear authority to organize the labor, a shared understanding of its critical importance, and a legal framework to ensure everyone contributed fairly to the upkeep from which all would drink. When that social contract remained strong, the water flowed for centuries, but when political will fractured or communal spirit waned, the maintenance would falter. Silt would rise, tunnels would clog, and plaster would crumble. The desert, patient and relentless, would always be waiting to take its water back. The greatest threat to these civilizations was never a single catastrophic storm, but the slow, quiet accumulation of neglect. The legacy of these ancient engineers did not vanish with the cities they sustained. For centuries, their monumental works lay sleeping under desert sands, their purposes half remembered in local legend or misunderstood by later generations who saw only ruins. The knowledge of how to build and, more importantly, how to maintain these systems faded, often replaced by modern technologies that promised easier, more immediate solutions. Deep wells powered by diesel pumps seemed to offer independence from the old communal ways. Yet this shift often came at a hidden cost, draining ancient aquifers faster than they could replenish and leaving communities more vulnerable than ever when the fuel ran out or the water table dropped. It is a paradox of our time that we are now, with great urgency, looking backward to move forward. Archaeologists and hydrologists are working in tandem, not just to document these structures as historical curiosities, but to decode their operating principles. They are reading the desert landscape like a forgotten manual, piecing together how a terrace pattern slowed erosion or how the alignment of a qanat shaft tapped a specific aquifer. This is not mere academic study, it is a recovery mission for practical wisdom. In the dry mountains of Iran, communities are actively reviving neglected qanat systems. The work is arduous, clearing collapsed tunnels and re-digging access shafts, but the reward is profound, a return of a sustainable, gravity-fed water source that requires no fossil fuels and sustains itself through careful stewardship. Along the coast of Chile and Peru, modern fog-catching projects stand as direct descendants of ancient practices. Where once there were stone piles or living hedges, now tall polymer mesh nets harvest hundreds of liters of water daily from the coastal mist, providing vital supplies for remote villages and reforestation projects. These are not nostalgic recreations, they are intelligent adaptations. Modern materials and mapping technologies enhance the efficiency, but the core insight remains unchanged, the ability to see water where others see only absence. This ancient knowledge offers something critical for our contemporary struggle with water scarcity, a philosophy of working with natural cycles rather than against them. It teaches the value of slow water, of capturing and infiltrating it into the landscape to recharge ecosystems, rather than speeding it away in concrete channels. It reminds us that the most resilient systems are often decentralized, maintained by the communities that depend on them. In an era of deepening droughts and overexploited resources, the silent, patient logic of the desert masters speaks with renewed urgency, offering a blueprint not just for survival, but for a sustainable harmony with a thirsty world. This story of water and willpower echoes far beyond the deserts of the Middle East or the Americas. The drive to master a challenging environment is a thread woven through human history across the globe, appearing in forms uniquely suited to each landscape. Take, for instance, the astonishing stepwells of the Indian subcontinent. In the arid regions of Rajasthan and Gujarat, where the water table could lie dozens of feet below the surface, communities did not simply dig a well. They built cathedrals in reverse. These magnificent structures, known as baolis, are monumental excavations. They feature long, stepped corridors that descend dramatically into the earth, flanked by pillared pavilions and ornate carvings. Their beauty is undeniable, but their function was brilliantly practical. The steps provided stable access to the water, even as its level rose and fell with the seasons. More importantly, the vast, shaded underground cavity created a cool, humid microclimate that drastically reduced evaporation. A baoli was not just a water source, it was a social hub, a place of respite from the heat, and an architectural prayer for survival, turning the act of drawing water into a daily procession of community and resilience. In a completely different environment, the watery world of the Valley of Mexico, another civilization demonstrated a parallel genius for hydrological engineering. The Aztecs, faced with a shallow lake rather than a desert, created the chinampas, often called floating gardens. They were actually intricate artificial islands built from woven reeds, mud, and rich sediment dredged from the lake bottom. These rectangular plots were anchored to the lakebed with willow trees, whose roots would eventually knit them into a stable landscape. A network of canals between the chinampas served as transportation routes, but their constant presence of water created a perfect, self-irrigating system. Moisture would seep through the porous soil, keeping crops perpetually hydrated, while the canals allowed for nutrient-rich muck to be regularly added. This was a system of astonishing productivity, capable of multiple harvests a year, and it sustained one of the largest cities in the world at the time, Tenochtitlan. From the sun-baked steppes descending into darkness in India to the fertile, water-laced grids of Mesoamerica, the core principle remains the same. Whether confronting scarcity or abundance, human societies have repeatedly shown a profound capacity to observe, to innovate, and to sculpt their environment into a form that can sustain collective life. It is a global testament to a single, powerful idea that civilization flourishes not where resources are easiest, but where ingenuity is deepest. The ingenuity of these ancient systems is undeniable, yet their stories are not fully written. For all we have uncovered, profound mysteries still linger beneath the desert sands, turning each answer into a doorway for new questions. Modern researchers, armed with satellite imagery and ground-penetrating radar, continue to map the staggering true scale of networks like the Hohokam canals, discovering branches that extend farther than any historical record suggested. These ghostly lines etched into the landscape from above hint at a civilization even more extensive and interconnected than we previously believed. Similarly, the ultimate fate of these societies prompts deep reflection. While the breach of Marib's dam is legendary, the reasons behind the dispersal of the ancestral pueblones from their cliff dwellings or the gradual abandonment of the Hohokam's great irrigation cities are subjects of quiet, ongoing study. Scholars carefully examine layers of evidence, from tree rings that reveal centuries of drought patterns to subtle shifts in settlement remains, piecing together a complex picture where environmental challenges intertwined with social dynamics. It was likely never one single cause, but a convergence of pressures that slowly altered an ancient balance. This investigative work extends to searching for techniques lost to time. Were there other, subtler methods of harvesting dew or channeling subsurface flows that left fewer traces? Every archaeological season in the world's arid regions holds the potential to uncover a new fragment of this ancient hydrological wisdom. This field is vibrantly alive, a continuous conversation between the past and the present, where each discovery refines our understanding of human resilience. The story of how desert civilizations captured water is therefore not a closed book of solved puzzles, but an open invitation. It invites us to look at a dry landscape and see not just absence, but a hidden ledger of human effort, a testament to the enduring quest to find a way. Their journey compels us to redefine the very source of a civilization. For these desert peoples, water was not found in a single, generous river. It was a puzzle scattered across the entire hydrological cycle, a resource hidden in the violent flash of a storm, the cool breath of a mountain aquifer, the drifting curtain of coastal fog, and even the damp chill of the night air. Their genius was a panoramic vision. They looked at the sky, the land, and the underground not as separate realms, but as interconnected parts of a single, fragile system they could learn to orchestrate. This shift in perspective is their most profound gift to us. They were not merely survivors clinging to an oasis. They were the original geoengineers, brilliant social organizers who understood that mastering water meant mastering cooperation. The qanat digger, the terrace builder, the canal cleaner each played a part in a silent symphony that turned scarcity into abundance. Their legacy is etched not only in stone channels and subterranean tunnels, but in the very idea that a society can flourish by working in harmony with a challenging environment rather than fleeing from it. Today, as we face our own era of climate uncertainty and growing water stress, their ancient ingenuity speaks with startling clarity. In a world often seeking complex, energy-intensive technological fixes, their solutions whisper a different wisdom. They teach the value of patience, of observing natural rhythms, and of designing systems that are resilient because they are woven into the landscape itself. They remind us that security often lies not in controlling a single source, but in understanding the entire cycle. Perhaps it is time we look to these desert masters once more, not to copy their tools, but to learn their philosophy. What forgotten wisdom might still lie buried in the landscapes around us? Share your thoughts or any stories of ancient ingenuity from your own part of the world in the comments below. The conversation about water and our future is just beginning.